Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're all very welcome. Céad Míle Fáilte go léir to the first of our lectures for 2017. I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas, and I wish you all a happy new year on behalf of the Society. Ken Harrington is my name, and tonight we have a lecture here that's been given to us by Gerry Lovett. Now, I first met Gerry in 1981.
For what?
We're on a farm, a piece of farmland in Moloney in County Leitrim. We were searching for the farmer's wife who had been missing for some time. Never found since, I may add. We walked shoulder to shoulder through a bog, pushing down a 6-foot long steel barb into the ground, twisting it, pulling it back out, and smelling the end of the steel barb. So I spent about 4 days with Gerry at that spectacular, wonderful, fun activity. And then it was decided they'd search a barn, a hay shed above in Leitrim. So when we went to search the hay shed in Leitrim, after a considerable amount of time, now the farmer, another neighbouring farmer, in fairness to him, he left us away at it for a long, long time. He then approached us to inform us in very colourful language that the hay shed was not the property of the man suspected of disposing of his wife. At this stage we had well and truly wrecked the hay shed. The farmer was most irate, made protestations to a younger Gerry Lovett who was standing there at the time, very cool, suave and sophisticated as he was then and now. To which Gerry simply replied, took out a piece of paper from his notebook, jotted down the name of the Garda Commissioner, care of Garda Headquarters, Phoenix Park, Dublin 8. He said to the farmer, "Write in and complain to that man." He says, "It's a big company and they generally don't rob anybody." And with that, the farmer wound off in his merry way. Did he ever claim, Gerry?
Not that I heard it.
Not that I heard it. Now that's the way to deal with a complaint. So without further ado, on the history of Garda Síochána, I'll give you Gerry Lovett. Switch off your mobile phones, please. If you don't, it's not penalty points, it's contempt of court to be held.
Thank you, Ken. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Very good. Well, Anne Hanrahan gave me this gig a few months ago. I don't think she realised what a big subject it is. You could do about 10 lectures on 10 different nights about the Garda Síochána. Never mind one night. But we'll motor through it fairly lively. I will be concentrating mostly on the earlier decades because they're more interesting in every sense of the word. Now, it won't be a glorious tribute to the Garda Síochána necessarily. There will be highlights and there will be lowlights. And it will be a warts and all account of the history of the force. So now, it started off, they had to replace the Royal Irish Constabulary after the War of Independence. The Royal Irish Constabulary were no longer acceptable to the people of Ireland. Over 500 were killed between 1916 and 1922. And as I digress slightly, I belong to a group called the Harp Society, also, who commemorate the RIC and the DMP, seeing they have been airbrushed out of history for decades. So I know I've spoken to 2 or 3 here already tonight who had grandfathers or great-grandfathers in the RIC and the DMP. And if you wish to honour them, last Saturday in August in Mount Argus Church. I think it's the 26th this year, 26th. I may be wrong there, but I think it is. So anyway, Civil War was over. Michael Collins decided he'd have to set up a new police force. And they set up a committee in the Gresham Hotel. Himself, Michael Staines, what's this fellow's name? Paddy Watch, Patrick Walsh, a former district inspector with the Royal Irish Constabulary. And they began to organise the new police force. Now, originally, believe it or not, they were to be called the People's Guard. The People's Guard, okay? But that was changed then to the Civic Guard. But the Civic Guard title only lasted officially for about a year when it became Garda Síochána. Loosely translated, Guardians of the Peace. Although the word Civic Guard is still being used up to this day, in fact. I'm sure you've all heard it. Now, it started off with a row, right? Surprise, surprise. And the reason for the row were the number of ex-Royal Irish Constabulary who were being recruited into the... Not so much that they were being recruited, there was 180 members of the RIC in training, along with the Garda recruits originally. But what did cause the row was that the RIC men were being promoted to high rank, which didn't sit well with the guards. Remember, most of the new guards were former IRA men. And they didn't like to see their former foes, so to speak, being promoted over their heads. Now, they had no fixed abode for a while. They had no fixed abode. They were housed for a while in the RDS in Ballsbridge, but they were told they had to be out for the spring show, 1922. They had to be out for the spring show. So out they had to go, and they were in Collinstown, which is now Dublin Airport. They were in Kildare Barracks, Kildare Military Barracks, in Kildare town. And that is where the trouble, the so-called Garda mutiny, happened in Kildare Military Barracks. Now, it began really on the 15th of May 1922. They promoted this fella, Paddy Watch. He was brought in as a deputy commissioner in the new Guards. And they promoted 4 other RIC men to superintendent. And that did not sit well with a lot of these ex-IRA men. They refused to salute them. It caused a big row. There was a kind of a sit-in for several weeks in Kildare Barracks. The army was sent down at one stage. And they were outside the gate with an armoured car, with a machine gun, a guy sitting behind a machine gun pointing it at the Kildare Barracks. Inside were several hundred guards with rifles, waiting for the attack. And the massacre was, avoided just about. Just about. The army withdrew. There was no shooting. The army withdrew. Now, it was originally intended to arm them, to arm the new police force. They were each to get a .45 revolver. But after the Garda mutiny, there was a what's the word? An inquiry. O'Shiel, what the hell was it? O'Shiel McAuliffe, or McAuliffe Shiel, or something like that. And they actually said that arming the guards would make them look uncomfortably similar to the Royal Irish Constabulary. And in fact, it was the best thing that could have happened to new Civic Guards. It was the best thing that could have happened to them. Because had they been armed, they'd have been targets for attack, even more than they were. They'd have been targets for attack by the anti-treaty IRA, who were still alive and well, and thousands of them all over the country. Now, that's Paddy Watch. He was a former, I told you, I think, district inspector and the RIC. He was a first cousin to Owen Duffy, who would later be commissioner. And he was helping the national cause during the War of Independence. Like, he did lots of good work surreptitiously for the IRA. For example, he put a stop to several, he put a stop to the Black and Tan several times from carrying out beatings and shootings. When he went to meetings in Dublin, he'd tip off Owen Duffy afterwards. Duffy during the War of Independence, he was a IRA commander in County Monaghan. But anyway, the commissioner was, where is he going? Go back. This fellow, Michael Staines, was commissioner. And at the same time, he was a TD. Now, it was a very strange time, in those days. He was a TD as well as being Garda commissioner. But he resigned after this rebellion. Am I on the air? Yeah. He resigned after the so-called Garda mutiny. And so did Paddy Watch, in sympathy with him. But Walsh was later brought back by O'Duffy as an assistant commissioner. So he was in the RIC, he was in the Guards, he resigned from the Guards, or he resigned in sympathy with Michael Staines, and he was brought back again as an assistant commissioner. Now I have a few slides here. there's the guards being measured up for joining. Some of these photographs now are not of great quality. And there's a drill sergeant. His name was John Veal, V-E-L-E. And he's drilling those guys there. They look fairly rough looking there, as you can see them. As, what's his name, Brendan Behan said, that guards were wild men tempted down from the mountains of Kerry with lumps of raw meat. Yes. He also, what's this other one he had? Oh yeah, no matter how dismal a situation you find yourself in, you can depend on a policeman to make it worse. Which is very true, actually. Now, oh yes, this guy here. Now here's a man for you. He was guard number 1, Patrick J Kerrigan, P.J. Kerrigan. Now let me tell you about this guy. He was in 2 armies, he was in 3 police forces, and he was also a bigamist. Are you ready for all this now, right? Pay attention here now. He joined the RIC in March 1914. I was still under British rule then. He left after 7 months and he joined the army. The British Army, obviously, at the time. He married a Molly Finnegan. They had 2 boys and 2 girls. Now, after independence, he joined the Garda Síochána in February 1922. He was the first man in the queue. Hence his number 1, guard number 1. Now, he was promoted sergeant after 5 weeks. Now, that might strike you as strange, but it was quite common in the early days. You see, they had nobody. And it was nearly a question of, hands up who wants to be a sergeant, you know. Okay, you can read and write. Okay, you're a superintendent. Okay. And, you know, it was almost, I'm exaggerating slightly, but it was almost like that, you know. But this guy, to go back to Kerrigan, where was I now? He was in the RSC, he was in the British Army. Then he joined the Guards, and he was sacked from the Guards after 6 or 7 months, allegedly for striking a prisoner who called him a black and tan, which would be a sore thing to call one of these new Guards, I'd say, you know. And then, where was I now? Yes, next he joined the Free State Army. He was sacked from the Guards now, right? So now he joins the Free State Army. And he left that, and he joined the Dublin Metropolitan Police in 1924. Remember, the Dublin Metropolitan Police were not disbanded. They continued on to 1925, and they were then amalgamated with the Garda Síochána. He joined the DMP in 1924, and he played in the band for the DMP. He played the clarinet. But he left that again in 1926. He abandoned wife and family, went to America, where he married another woman. Her name was, where is she? Minnie Kleinberger. He married her in America while his wife was still alive in Ireland. Now, years later, he had a second family. He had 2 boys and 2 girls with his Irish wife, and he had a boy and a girl with the American wife. And the families later met up, all thanks to my good friend Jim Hurley, he's down there at the back, who did the research and arranged for the families to meet. But one sort of sad story about it was that his youngest daughter in Ireland, his Irish family, her name was Doreen. She died young from a burst appendix. But she had a pet name called, he used to call her Dodie. But his American daughter couldn't understand how he used to call her Dodie as well, although her real name was Rosemary. So when they got together, she cracked it, you know, she understood. He was still thinking of the daughter who died in Ireland. So he called his American daughter Dodie as well. Anyway, I spent too much time on that. Now here's the Guards' first public appearance at a funeral somewhere in North County, Dublin. Note, no uniforms. No uniforms. Am I in your way there? Can you see? And here they are marching into Dublin Castle. Marching into Dublin Castle, led by Staines. That's the gate in through, Palace Street, opposite the Olympia Theatre. Now the Guards they were sent out initially with little or no training, no uniforms often. Here's a group now. That's, I think down Kildare or somewhere in that country. They just had caps. And they were dispatched out on duty. Like that. Which wasn't uncommon in the early days. They didn't all have uniforms. And here's an early patrol car.
How they got guns there?
They had guns, yeah. Yeah, even though they were supposed to be unarmed, there were times they were given guns to go out. You see, they were well able to use guns, you see. Mostly former IRA men. Now here's Mr. O'Duffy. Owen O'Duffy, appointed Commissioner of the Guards at 30 years of age. Now you'd be doing well at the moment to be a sergeant at 30 years of age, but he was a Commissioner at 30 years of age. And initially, a man of boundless enthusiasm, great organisational skills. You know, he really, you know, he worked 18, 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. But quickly found himself in conflict with the government. The Minister for Justice, or Home Affairs it was called at the time, was Kevin O'Higgins. And he quickly annoyed his political masters because he was basically insolent to them. For example, he began appointing instructors for the recruits without referring to Home Affairs. And these guys had to be paid, you know. So Henry O'Freel, who was the Secretary of the Department of Home Affairs, wrote him a letter giving him a little slap across the knuckles. And Duffy wrote a scorcher of a reply back to him. I'm at a loss to know if they, meaning the civil servants, I'm at a loss to know if they exercise the same vigilance over other departments where hundreds of civil servants are employed at handsome remunerations who come in the morning at 11 o'clock, take an hour or two for lunch and leave sharp at 5 o'clock with a half day on Saturday and not one of whom perhaps ever did a day's work or lost an hour's sleep for Ireland. You see. And that was a fairly common occurrence between O'Duffy and his political master. Now, the new force was founded and the IRA were not happy. The anti-treaty IRA had been defeated in the Civil War, but they were still around the place, alive and well armed, and they issued a fatwa, to use a modern expression, on the Guards. And they condemned the force as of semi-military character, a continuation of the old RIC. And they said that drastic action would be taken after the 1st of January 1923 if the Guards didn't return to their homes or to civil employment. And they even offered them a note of safe conduct. Would you believe that? The IRA were going to give them a note of safe conduct. And it was signed by A. Murphy, Brigadier General, OC Kerry No. 1 Brigade. They always gave themselves great ranks. You know, this fellow was a Brigadier General. And it was posted up in Tralee, and also there was a similar notice then issued in Cork, this time by F.O. Holland, OC of the Cork No. 3 Brigade. And the superintendent in Bandon, a Superintendent O'Duffy, no relation of the Commissioner, he forwarded a note to the Commissioner saying that the men were somewhat restive since this proclamation was issued. Again, O'Duffy was having none of it. He says there is no place in the Guard for men who are uneasy or restive or discontented. And the last thing the people require or desire is the retention of a faint-hearted or faithless public servant. And he said he'd accept the resignation of all such men, irrespective of rank, at short notice. So he had no sympathy for these fellows who were feeling a bit restless. But the IRA carried out a major campaign against the Garda stations. The Guards were moving out the country. Well, there's O'Duffy talking to a group of officers. Believe it or not, that's Rathfarnham Garda station, after it was destroyed by the IRA. And I have another photo here. But that doesn't sound like the station that I have now, is it?
The Bank of Ireland, Gerry.
The
The Bank of Ireland
in the village?
in the village. Or was the Bank of Ireland, I don't know if it's still there, but it's
Ah.
beside the Church of Ireland.
AIB today.
Oh, the AIB in the village, near the church, near the Protestant church, is it? Yes.
Opposite the old courthouse.
So between December 1922 and November 1923, 106 Garda stations were attacked around the country. Some of them more than once, if they didn't destroy it properly the first time. Now, the reception the new guards got when they went out among the people was mixed, to say the least. Now, in Ballyhonus, County Mayo, the Free State Army shut up the Garda station. Now, before you ask me why, I don't know. Some of them went to Mass in Rathmore in County Kerry, and a young girl spat at them. In Elphin, that's County Roscommon, I think, they were burdened out of 3 stations, and the locals prevailed on the local publican to give them rooms over the pub. Now, in Glaslough in County Monaghan, the Orange Order gave them the use of the Orange Hall in Glaslough. And then in Monaghan town, a pipe band turned out to welcome them. So the reception was very mixed, as you can see. Now what's coming up there? Oh yes. This is the first guard to be murdered in the new state. Now the photo is not great. I snagged that off the Garda website, but the photo is poor enough there. His name was Henry Phelan. 14th of November 1922. He was shot in Moloney, County Tipperary. 3 raiders entered. He was there with 2 colleagues. The story goes, by a hurley ball, a sliotar, for a team that were setting up they were stationed in Callan, which is over the border in County Kilkenny, I think. And 2 gunmen entered, and one of the guys with a revolver shot Garrett Phelan. And the second guy, who had a rifle, said, what are you after doing that for? Obviously they had no intention of shooting the guard. But they left anyway, and one of the raiders said to the other guards, trust me, this was an accident, or something like that, and they left. But the guards found out who was involved. 2 of them were charged, but the Attorney General didn't proceed with the charge. The third guy, a guy called William Cody, fled to America. But years later, the government told the Commissioner that he came within the scope of the amnesty. There was an amnesty for political crime committed between the 6th of December 1921, that was the date the treaty was signed, and the 12th of May 1923, at the end of the Civil War. Now there was a huge poteen problem. You see, the people were mad for a bit of law. The RSC were effectively ineffective for a long time, and there were streams of letters pouring into the Commissioner and to the Minister to do something about poteen. There was children going to school in the west of Ireland drunk from poteen. This is all in letters that were sent in at the time. The army were withdrawn at the end of 1923, the Free State Army, at the end, after the Civil War was over. So the guards were now on their own, enforcing law. Now, oh yeah, this is, I just used this slide because it's the only photograph I have where, it's not showing the whole lot, is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, there's 5 of them there, right? If you see here, this is the only photograph I've seen guards wearing berets. It was a continuation of the RIC, had a similar thing for guys on a cycling patrol. So 1, 2, is it 3 of them there had the berets? I never saw it. It's the only photograph I've seen that in. Now, anyone who knows Cavan Street Garda Station?
Yeah.
That's it. Why is SC written on that? Exactly. Search out here. Now, I don't know what year that is, but I suspect 1930s maybe.
No, pre-28.
Pre-28?
Search out here went after 1928.
No,
38.
38.
Yes.
Sorry,
Yes,
yeah.
that's right. Now, this is a posed photograph, obviously, of guards. They had 10,000 prosecutions for poteen in 1923 alone. 10,000. That's what's that, 200 a week on average. So they really clamped down hard on poteen. Now, this is obviously a posed photograph. Note the two diligent detectives here. They're tasting the product to make sure it is the dreaded spirit. I have another one here, yes. That's a more recent photograph. Although the guards still have the button up, the choker tunics.
Yeah.
So it's before 55 anyway. Now, I used this photograph to talk about the DMP amalgamating with the guards. That is Constable James Manifold. Unusual name, James Manifold. His granddaughter is a detective in Kilmainham, Detective Garda Anne McGowan. I know some of you guys down there know her. So she gave me that photograph. Note the helmet. I'll be coming back to helmets later. But he's joined the Dublin Metropolitan Police in 1924. And they were amalgamated with the Garda Síochána in 1925. And he continued on. He was stationed in Pearse Street every day of his life up to 1964. Now, there was lots. Ireland was a bit like Dog City in 1880, but the amount of shootings and gangsterism that was at loose in Ireland in those years. And this guy, Sgt James Woods, I know the photograph isn't great, but he was shot by armed raiders in Scartiglen Garda Station in County Kerry, 3rd of December 1923. 5 or 6 masked men rushed in and the shotguns and shouting hands up, and one of them shot Sgt Woods. Now, I mentioned this one because a few days later there was a reprisal shooting. The Free State Army went to a nearby house. They dragged a young fella called Thomas Brosnan out and they shot him, but near his own door, as a reprisal for shooting Sgt Woods. Now, whether he was involved or not, we don't know. But the guards pursued it, and they identified the soldiers involved, and it led to the arrest of a Lieutenant Jeremiah Gaffney, who was tried, convicted, and hanged for the murder, which was kind of unusual. Now, in 1922-23 periods, there was lots of unofficial executions of IRA men. You know that, I'm sure you. I mean, the original special branch, the Oriel Housemen. Now, they were guys not to be messed with, right? All former IRA men, a lot of them, Michael Collins's gunmen during the War of Independence. And they shot dozens of people, like left on the side of the road with no due process or whatever. So, I mean, there's no point trying to cover it up. That's the fact. They did. So the next guy here, oh yes, this is Patrick O'Halloran, also shot 28th of January 1924. This was in Baltinglass County, Wicklow, following a bank raid in the town by 2 ex-soldiers. The manager was shot and injured. Morris J. Wolfe was his name. And Mrs. Wolfe heard the commotion and she rushed out in the street shouting for a guard. And who happens nearby? Only Patrick O'Halloran. So Halloran came along and some well-meaning local handed him a revolver. So he went after the raiders and they crossed this bridge. I took that photo myself. They crossed this bridge and one of them turned back and fired a shot, killing Garda O'Halloran. Again, The shooter was quickly identified. Well, there was two people involved, but one of them, Felix McMullen, an ex-soldier, he fled to Liverpool, but he was arrested there by the Liverpool police and brought back here, and he was hanged in Mountjoy prison for that shooting, and he was hanged on the 1st of August 1924. Now, for some unknown reason, the IRA carried out attacks on a dozen Garda stations in November 1926. Garda stations in Cork, Tipperary, Waterford and Meath. And the guy on the left, Sergeant Jim Fitzsimmons, he was shot and killed in St Luke's Garda station in Cork. And Garda Hugh Ward on the right, he was shot and killed in Hollyford in County Tipperary. I told you it was like Dodge City, you know, in the first few decades of the force. Now, there was a major roundup of IRA men. One guy was charged with the Ward murder on the right, and he was positively identified by a guard as being one of the killers, but the AG wouldn't go ahead with it, and the charge was withdrawn. Now, you know him? Kevin O'Higgins, Minister for Justice. He was shot, he was assassinated on the 10th of July 1927. And this is from the newspaper, on the 11th of July. It's at the junction of Booterstown Avenue and Cross Avenue in Blackrock. And of course, shooting a Minister for Justice. There was a major hoo-ha. The usual thing was there was dozens of IRA men rounded up. 10 or 12 of them were charged with murder, with no evidence at all. They were arrested and charged, and then they began looking for the evidence. I mean, to modern policemen, like, that sounds crazy. But that was the thing at the time. You arrested him, you arrested likely candidates, you charged them with the crime, and then, I wonder if there any evidence against these fellas. And a few weeks later, they offered no evidence, and they were let out, and nobody thought anything out. Now, to modern ears, this sounds crazy, but that was the way things were done at the time. But it would be 50 years later before the identity of the killers were found. There were 3 IRA men called Archie Doyle, Bill Gannon, and Timothy Coughlin. And that's the funeral, that's O'Higgins' funeral, coming out of Westland Road Church. But Bill Gannon, one of the shooters, that's in there, and it's not a great photograph. But in 1965, he was dying, and on his deathbed, he told his son what happened. How the 3 of them were going to a match in Wexford in a stolen car, apparently, as you do, and they saw O'Higgins walking along the road on his own, and they were astonished. No guard with him. So they said, no, it couldn't be O'Higgins. So they went back for a second look. Sure enough, it was O'Higgins, and out they got, and they all fired at him. He was struck by 7 or 8 bullets, but he lived for several hours afterwards. But Gannon told his son that he was haunted by the memory of that shooting, and that he had done a lot of shootings, as he told the son. Too many, he said. But that one haunted him all his life because of the words of forgiveness uttered by O'Higgins as he lay dying. He said, what did he put it? You were wrong, but I forgive you. I forgive you. That's what he said. And that haunted Gannon all his life. A man who had done lots of killings. And young Gannon and Una O'Malley O'Higgins, who was Kevin O'Higgins' is it granddaughter or daughter, I'm not sure which, probably granddaughter. They met up later, and she organised a mass for both Kevin O'Higgins and for the 3 guys who were involved in the killing. So it was a strange way it turned out. Oh yes. Superintendent William Geary, have you heard of him? He was subject to the worst miscarriage of justice in the history of the Guards. He was a superintendent in Kilrush, and he was sacked in 1928 for giving information to the IRA. Have you heard of him? The IRA set him up. The IRA knew the guards were checking or opening their mail. That their mail was being intercepted and opened. And they put a bogey letter in, implying that they had paid off Gerry £100 for the information he gave them. And for years he protested his innocence. He went to America. Year after year he wrote letters, and he was constantly refused, or his appeals were constantly rejected. Until that is April 1999, when the then Minister for Justice, to his great credit, John O'Donoghue, conceded and agreed that there had been a miscarriage of justice. Now Gerry had said repeatedly he wasn't looking for compensation, that he just wanted an acknowledgement that he had been wronged. And he got a pension of £17,500 per annum, and he got a lump sum of £67,500, an ex gratia payment. Now he went to America. He was in the American Armed Forces during World War II, and he lived until the age of 105. There he is shortly before his death. Finally vindicated after, how many years? 1928 to... About 70 years, is it? 71 years. Okay, this is Detective Garrett OSullivan. He was killed by a booby trap bomb in County Clare in July 1929. By the IRA, obviously. Now, ironically, he was a former IRA man and had been involved in the shooting of RSC Constable Alexander Clark in Skibbereen, hours before the truce on the 11th of July, or minutes before the truce actually, on the 11th of July 1921. But he was blown up by a booby trap bomb. They got an anonymous letter telling them, the letter read, "I found a box of ammunition and papers in a butt of hay in the Haggard. The times are so dangerous I was afraid to keep it near the place. I threw it inside the ditch at Laheath Cross in Ardil. I want you to take it away. I do not want to get into trouble with people around here. Signed, Farmer." So he wasn't the guy who got there first. It was another fellow called O'Driscoll, Detective O'Driscoll. And O'Driscoll put the box up on the carrier of his bicycle and began cycling with it back to the station. Now, if that happened today, he'd be in big trouble for his carelessness. But on the way, he met Detective Garda Sullivan and the Garda. There was a second guard, I forget his name. And they decided they'd try and open the box. So they started off, they put a cable on the box, and went back 20 yards or whatever, and gave it a chuck, and nothing happened. So Asha, there couldn't be much in it. So Sullivan goes over, lifted the lid on the box, kaboom, dead. Oh yes, this is Superintendent John Curtin. He was the highest ranking officer and the only superintendent to be murdered in the history of the force. 28 years of age, very active against the IRA in County Tipperary. And he was going home on the night of the 21st of March 1931, and that's the entrance to his home. That's probably his car. Now the gates were normally left open, but tonight the left-hand gate was closed, obviously to slow him down, so he'd have to stop to open it. And he was cut down by a hail of gunfire at the gates here. Well, there are detectives there at the scene the following day. And the reason was his ruthless attitude towards the IRA. Now afterwards, Tipperary County Board of the GA, anyone here from Tipperary? But the Tipperary County Board of the GA refused to adopt a motion condemning the murder. There was a motion prepared by the chairman, a Reverend John Marr, but he could get no one to propose it. Never mind seconded. He could get no one to propose it. And he was disgusted and he intended resigning. But he was talked out of it by the Bishop of Cashel, the Archbishop of Cashel, Dr. Harty, at the time. So it was one of the few cases where a guard was deliberately targeted. You'll hear of another one later. He was deliberately targeted because of his intense activities against the IRA. And this was admitted later by Frank Ryan, an IRA commander. He told the Daily Express in August 1931, and I quote, "Take the case of Superintendent Curtin. As you say, he was shot after he had conducted a prosecution for illegal drilling. But that is not all the story. Curtin belonged to the Civic Guards, which is supposed to be an unarmed force that does not concern itself with political affairs. Superintendent Curtin exceeded his duty. He went out of his way to persecute the IRA. We draw a distinction between members of the Civic Guard and the men of the CID. The Civic Guard have no right to interfere in matters that do not concern them. If they ask for trouble, they must not be surprised if they get it." So the IRA were dictating to the guards what their duties were. So now, 10 years into the new force, I have more about this fella, I think. Oh yeah, that's his funeral. That's the superintendent's funeral. And yes, back to old Duffy. Up to 1932 now, we have 10 years, the force is 10 years old, 12 members of the guards have been murdered in the first 10 years. 10 of them were carried out by the IRA. 1932, Fianna Fáil gained power. Well, originally with the support of the Labour Party, and Dev called the snap election in 1933, you know that story as well, and he got an overall majority the second time. But when Dev was about to take power, O'Duffy was concerned. Now, David Nelligan's book on the Garda Síochána, Conor Brady's book about the Garda Síochána has an account of what Nelligan told him. Nelligan told him that he was called to a meeting at Garda headquarters with O'Duffy, that O'Duffy showed him a proclamation that he was going to issue. He was going to seize power with the support of the army, and he was calling on the people of Ireland to support him. This is what he was planning. Now, this was the age of dictators, right? And Nelligan told him, "You don't expect me to have anything to do with this." But O'Duffy mentioned it to the Army Chief of Staff, Michael Brennan, and Brennan was having none of this. He transferred some of O'Duffy's pals who were in the army to obscure positions. And he went back to O'Duffy and told him if he tried to stage a coup, he'd be arrested by the army. And there was no more about it. Now, there's no independent verification of that story, but it seems to fit O'Duffy's personality, because he had fascist tendencies, as we'll see shortly. And he was quoted one time as saying that he was the third most important man in Europe after Hitler and Mussolini. This was before Franco came into the picture. Now, that was okay. He obviously abandoned his plan for a coup. Now, one of the first things that happened with the new government is that David Nelligan, that man there, he was sacked. He had been brought in 1925 from the army to organise the new special branch. He was the spy in the castle. He was helping Michael Collins during the War of Independence. He was also in the British Secret Service. He was in the DNP, in the G division, in the detective branch. And he was asked to join the British Secret Service, which he did. having consulted Michael Collins first. So he was giving information in to the British, information that had been, he cleared it with Michael Collins first about what to tell them. Do you follow? And afterwards, you see, after he was sacked, he was told well, he wasn't sacked, he was told to resign. If he resigned, he'd get a job in the civil service at the same wages. If he didn't resign, he'd be sacked. So he bowed to the inevitable and he left. And he was put over to the Land Commission, still on the same pay as the Chief Superintendent, about £500 a year plus allowances. This at a time when a clerical officer max pay was about £200 per year. And he was left in an office on his own for 30 years with nothing to do. Don't feel too bad for him. When he retired, he had 6 pensions. Are you all ready? He had a pension from, where is he going? He was in the DMP, Dublin Metropolitan Police. He was in the British Secret Service, who continued paying him a pension afterwards, even though he was working against them. He was in the Royal Irish Constabulary. On paper, the British did him a favour coming up to the treaty. We'll put you down for the RIC. Under the terms of the treaty, there was 12 years service added. So now he could get a pension from the RIC. He was in the Free State Army, and he made a name for himself down in Kerry when he was in the Free State Army. He was in the Guards, and he was in the Civil Service. 6 pensions, thanks very much. Now, next thing that happened is that Duffy was sacked. He didn't go quietly. He was offered a position as controller of prices, I think it was called. Now, what is that? Don't ask me, I haven't the foggiest idea, but controller of prices, and he'd have the same wages as a commissioner. But Duffy, being a fairly circular individual, no, he wouldn't do it. So, sacked he was. You know, he got 40% of his salary as a pension. But they didn't, the government, the Fianna Fáil government, weren't too keen on Duffy. And in fact, Sean Lemass once described him as an exotica seeking rural twit. I never heard that insult before, but that's what he said. An exotica seeking rural twit. And he was replaced by Eamon Bry. I think I have Bry here too. Yes. He was replaced by Eamon Bry. Bry, by the way, was a chief superintendent. I think this drops out sometimes. He was a chief superintendent, so he was promoted over the heads of deputy commissioners and assistant commissioners. So there must have been a fair bit of growling about that up in Garda headquarters. Now his name became associated with a new intake of police that became known as the Bry Harriers. And that all goes back to, well, I have to go back to Duffy first. He got a new job. He was invited to take charge of or to lead the Blue Shirts, or to give them their proper title, the Army Comrades Association. Well, they changed their names a few times to dodge the law. They were also the National Guard, they were the Young Ireland Association, they were the League of Youth. But Duffy led the Blue Shirts for a while. There he is. See, they had kind of fascist tendencies, the fascist salute and so on. And Duffy announced on the 13th of August 1933, a Sunday, they would have 20,000 Blue Shirts would march on government buildings. The government troop fight. In 1922, Mussolini did a march on Rome, where he seized power. And they were afraid Duffy would pull a similar stunt. He also had female section. Ladies, you see, he was an egalitarian leader. There's the ladies, they're well able to do the Zig Heil as well. But De Valera banned the march. But he didn't trust the guards to remain loyal. They called in Bry and asked them what would the guards' attitude be if O'Duffy tried to stage a coup. And Bry told them that the guards would remain loyal. But the government weren't too sure. So they recruited, well, eventually it was over 300 detectives into special branch with no regard for recruitment regulations. Be 5'9", I think, at the time. The height went up and down a few times, but I think it was 5'9" at the time. Some of them were 5'0". Some of them were married, which was against the regulations at the time. Some of them, the oldest of them, were 40 years of age. The max age is 27 or 28. You know, that varied up and down too. So they brought in 300 of those. Well, not all together, gradually. The first group got the shortest training course ever known in the history of policing. A 10-minute lecture from a chief superintendent Curtin. They were handed revolvers and 200 rounds of ammunition and sent over to government buildings to protect it against the blue shirts if they marched on Sunday. But as it happened, O'Duffy cancelled the march. So the crisis was over. And as you know, later he went to Spain during the Spanish Civil War. And I gather Franco couldn't wait to get rid of him, because I think they were more interested in vino and senoritas than they were in fighting the communists. Anyway, now, yes, this is...
Sorry, Gerry. I think if you push the microphone away from you a bit.
Sorry, yeah. 1, 2, 3. Are you still getting me?
Yeah.
Sorry, thanks for that. Okay. Now, where am I? This is Garda Ned Malarkey in Boyle, 1935. See? No pipe water in the Garda station. So down you had to go to the pump on the street. That's his wife, Monica. His son sent me that photograph there some years ago. Next we have a patrol car. Jones's Road, 1938. And we're up now to the war years. That's the Minister for Justice at the time, who was Gerald Boland. That's him there, I think. And I'm nearly sure that's Canaan, Michael J. Canaan, the then Garda Commissioner. Now, when war broke out, De Valera got worried. He knew the IRA, you know, the old Fenian philosophy, England's difficulty is Ireland's opportunity. So he was afraid that the IRA would start something and give either the Germans or the British an excuse to invade the country, you know, having declared a policy of neutrality. So during the war, believe it or not, 10 detectives, 10 special branch men were murdered by the IRA. Not 10, sorry, 6. During the 6 years of the war, 6 detectives were murdered by the IRA. First man was this, John Roach. He was shot in Cork City in January 1940. The shooter was Thomas McCurtain, that guy, son of Thomas McCurtain, former Lord Mayor of Cork, who was shot by the RIC probably in 1920. And McCurtain, young McCurtain, had the closest shave with the hangman that was ever known in the history of crime. He was sentenced to death. The day before the execution, his counsel, Sean McBride, went to the High Court to appeal it, but he did it minutes before the court rose at 4 o'clock. Knowing that it would be refused, and knowing that it would be too late for the Supreme Court to hear the appeal. Excuse me. And he was right. Tough put back. Now, 2 weeks later, the Supreme Court rejected the appeal, but De Valera was under fierce pressure from various sources, and he commuted the sentence to life imprisonment. Now, he was approached, among others, by Cardinal MacRory, Primate of All Ireland at the time, who appealed to him not to have McCurtain executed. You see, a lot of the Fianna Fáil cabinet were IRA men who had fought with McCurtain during the War of Independence. One IRA man in Cork, a fella called, or former IRA man, now Fianna Fáil TD, Martin Corrie, went to De Valera and told them that he and several others would resign their seats and run as independents if McCurtain was executed. Now De Valera commuted it, but he regretted it later, and he didn't make the same mistake again. Now, this was a bomb in Dublin Castle. At the Special Branch offices in Dublin Castle, the IRA planted a bomb there in April 1940. Nobody was killed, but a number of detectives were injured. And the IRA were being helped by a rogue detective called James Crompton, a Bry Harrier, who was supporting the IRA. And well, he got 5 years in jail for his trouble later when they copped on what he was at. 98A Rathgar Road. 2 other detectives were shot and killed up there in the 3rd of August 7th of May 16th of August 1940. Detective Sergeant Patrick McKeown and Richard Hyland. The government brought in emergency legislation overnight. Military court, consisting of army officers, from which there was no appeal, no habeas corpus. The military court decided, end of story. In 2 weeks, 2 IRA men were executed for that. Or well, maybe 3 weeks. The shootings was on 16th of August 1940, and the 2 men, Francis Hart and Patrick McGrath, were executed by firing squad in Mountjoy, 6th of September 1940. I mean, the ruthlessness of it, like, is staggering by modern standards. If you were prosecuted now for having a bald tire, I mean, it would take longer than 3 weeks. But this was all done inside of a 3-week period. But that's just a photograph I came across there of the bombing of the North Strand. No, the IRA didn't do that. That was the Germans who dropped bombs there during the war, among other places. You know, time is pushing, so I'll have to push on. Dennis O'Brien, shot in Rathfarnham, in Ballyboden and Rathfarnham, September 42. And an IRA man called Charlie Kearns, that guy, he was hanged for that in Mountjoy prison. Michael Walsh, shot in a Garda and Army raid on an IRA house in Ballyjamesduff, County Cavan. See, I scanned that, I cut that photograph. He's the guy on the left here. See, that's the same photograph. I kind of isolated that from the main photograph. He shot, the person who shot him, they shot each other basically during the raid. The IRA man shot him, but he at the same time fired and killed the IRA man, a guy called Paddy Dermody. And finally, where is he? George Mordaunt, another special branch man, was shot in Donecarney, October 42. And another IRA man called Maurice O'Neill was shot by firing squad for that. The ruthlessness of the government attitude in the 1940s was staggering, like, by modern standards. Yes. Helmets. This photograph goes back to the 1930s. There's a guard in Wellington Quay letting kids across the road there in traffic. Later on then you have guards there marching in, see, still with the helmets. This is, I suspect that is a Corpus Christi procession, or I may be wrong. I think it's some kind of a religious procession. I think that's O'Connor Street. Yeah. Is that Burton's there? Yeah. That's at the junction of Talbot Street there. I think. I may be wrong.
It's not Cork, is it?
It's Dame Street, George Street.
The point I'm making is, see the guards still wearing helmets. Up to the 1950s, the guards in Dublin and in Cork as well were wearing helmets. But they were dropped eventually under pressure from the GRA, the Garda Representative Association, who thought they were a bit redolent of British imperialism. I thought they looked kind of smart. And there's more here. Oh yes. This is Landorn Road. This clown here up in the goalpost, see, they were trying to talk him down. Now, later on then, in the 1950s, I showed this photograph because, see, one guard there, that's Bill Hurley, obviously some of you know him there. Yeah. And see, the other guards have the open neck tunic. Oh, yeah. So they changed around 1955. Obviously, Hurley, he didn't have his new uniform yet. Now, there was cutting-edge technology in 1953. That's a walkie-talkie. You wore it on your back. Now, who's this guy? There's a clue in the music he has in his hand.
Who wrote the music?
Dick Farrelly. He wrote the Isle of Innisfree, the theme music in The Quiet Man. I'm sorry, I know the time is pushing. Who's he?
Loads.
Jim Brannigan, yes. I have several photographs of him there. A man, a legend in his own lifetime. That's him there with some of his... I think that's Sonny Heaney. I think that fella's name is Burton, I think. I don't know who that is.
Mort Long.
What?
Mort Long on the right.
Mort Long. And they had a squad going around dealing with disorder. Sorry about anyone, if anyone is from Ballyfermot. That's a 78 bus going to Ballyfermot. It was allegedly a troublesome bus in those days. There he is minding George Best. And he was also a boxing referee. Now, at the end of his life, he retired in 1973. He got presents from the ladies of the evening down around the canal. He didn't call them prostitutes, he called them pavement hostesses. Pavement hostesses. But they had great time for him, because he had a kind of an unorthodox fashion for dealing with violent and disorderly clients. In fact, if he was in the Guards today, he'd be sacked in about a week. But in those days, it was accepted. Now, I joined the Guards in 1970, and he retired in 73. So I never worked with him, but I used to see him in action in court from time to time. And he'd take your breath away, the things he said in court. He'd actually tell the judges what to do. I saw him one day, and he said that he had arrested some guy for public order type stuff. And he did this, and he did that. And I went over to him, Justice, and I gave him a few clips. And I brought him to the station. That's what he said. Again, that's the word he used. I gave him a few clips. And he said, but Justice, he says, he's not a bad lad, and I recommend he be bound to the peace. And Justice Herman Good, who was an old gent, he was in the courts at the time. Very well, Sergeant, he says. There you go. Now, oh yes, the Rose Tattoo Saga. Have you heard of the Rose Tattoo Saga?
Yes.
It was a play by Tennessee Williams. And in the play there was a scene. There was a scene where the character who fancies the young female lead, Serafina Della Rosa, and there's a scene in the play where he drops a condom and he kicks it under the couch, but she berates him. Now this is Ireland in 1950, 57, and contraceptives were illegal, as you know, in those times. So they decided to play it safe, if you pardon the pun, and that the actor would mime it. So there was no condom on the stage. They mimed it, but the guards appeared. This must have been very embarrassing for them. They appeared and they told he was sorry, I didn't tell you his name. Alan Simpson. He was an army officer actually, and his wife, her name was Carolyn Swift. And they had a theatre down there in Herbert Lane called the Pike Theatre. So you probably know this story, but the guards tried to talk him into shutting down the play. And he'd have to remove objectionable passages from it. But, I mean, there were no objectionable passages in it. But anyway, he refused to do that. And he was arrested. There he is, second from right there. He's being brought out by detectives there and driven off in the car. And he was charged with indecency. And the guard in the bridewell said to him, the jailer, who was looking after the prisoners, came to him and he said, was it naked women you're in for? And Simpson said, no. So the guard went off and he came back a short time later with a bottle of baby power, which he gave to Simpson, which was gratefully accepted. But eventually, at the end of the day, the case collapsed. And it was thrown out.
I thought it was a guard that complained that was at the show.
Well, it's not clear who complained. There was a guard at the show.
It was a show.
there were guards went to the show.
Yeah, but it was this guard was actually at the show.
I didn't hear that one, no.
Yeah.
But-
I remember it really well.
Yeah. But there was a bit of hilarity. See, the guards' evidence were trying to say there were sexual undertones in this play. But a Detective Sergeant Martin caused a laughter in court when he revealed that he brought his wife to the play on one occasion. And there was further laughter when another detective said he bought the book of the play in a shop called, I think it was Duffy and Company in Westmoreland Street. And that shop was known for selling religious books, apparently. So they had a great laugh at the poor old guards over this. Anyway, moving on smartly. Oh yeah, he was protesting. He was protesting down there as well in Herbert Lane at the guards. Now, here's the Valera. Now, I'm gone off topic slightly here. But I came across this article about De Valera, which sums him up. Now, it's not just a sentence or two. So, this is after the IRA campaign in the 1950s. So, the IRA had to be stopped, and Dev was the man. Consider him. This man who turns on his erstwhile friends and comrades. He is the master of the political double-cross. The frozen mask-like face gives no hint of the scheming liquid mind beneath. His cold eyes, impassive but now very weak, look out on the world with the cunning of an aging dinosaur. Brilliant, wasn't it? I think that was brilliant. Sorry, I'm gone off topic there. Now, oh yes, the Colleenies. The Colleenies came into the Guards in 9th of July 1959, causing some concern to our elected representatives in Valera. Yes, ladies and gentlemen? Deputy Frank Sherwin, TD, said the following. This is before the women were brought into the Guards. He said that while the recruits should not be actually horse-faced, they should not be too good-looking. They should be just plain women and not targets for marriage. Would you believe that? An elected representative said that in Galway. No female guards here, is there? And he was on his feet again a few years later, 1962. The minister at the time was Charlie Haughey, but Frank Sherwin again. Is the minister aware of a recent statement that quite a number of Gardaí will marry this year? That being the case, does it not demonstrate that good-looking Gardaí should not in the public interest be recruited? I mean, I'm not making that up. That is actually true. And they were the first 12 girls there. There's, some of you know, there's Deirdre Killeen anyway. She's still around. There's Josie Dwyer, she died a couple of years ago. And what do you call her? Sarah McGuinness, yes, there, top right. Second from right there on top. Now, two of the guards in the car there, 1960, but I have to move on smartly before I'm thrown out. The McCushla Ballroom, yes. You know what that's about. There's another photograph. There was a bit of a row over money in the Guards. Surprise, surprise, nothing changes. 1961, there was the McCushla affair. The Guards were up in arms. Well, the younger Guards. There was a pay rise granted to Guards with 5 years service or more. But there was no rise for the younger fellas. And they had a fiery meeting in the McCushla Ballroom. 815 men turned up. The Commissioner, Dan Costigan, banned it. And there was inspectors outside with pen and paper taking the names of the guards they could identify going into the meeting. And they identified 165 men who were all served with discipline papers. You know, that were being formally charged with the discipline. Things were very hot now with this. But the government got legal advice that the guards had a constitutional right. In Garda Station on the 11th of May 1923. Are you all ready? Visited station in conjunction with divisional tour. Sergeant N. Lennon and station party present. When we arrived at the station, the sergeant sat glowering at me and refused to call the party to attention. I called the party to attention myself, and Garda O'Neill tried to rise but fell into the fireplace. I asked the sergeant to account for the state of affairs existing at the station, and he replied in such a manner as would do justice to the worst corner boy in the slums of London. I searched the premises and found that a seizure of poteen, 3 gallons, made on the previous day, had now been almost consumed by the station party, and the barracks servant sat with a baton in her hand, protecting the remainder of it, and refused to move. She also had possession of the station books and records, and she refused to let me read and examine them. In my examination of the barracks, I found that the WC was filled with station records, apparently used by the station party on their visits there. I heard a noise coming from the cell, and when I went to investigate, I found 3 young ladies there from whom I took statements. They complained that when passing the barracks, they were forcibly taken in by Sergeant Lennon, Gardaí Burke and O'Toole for a purpose better imagined than described. In the kitchen of the station, I found Garda Burke. He caught me by the uniform and would not let me go until I promised to refund a fine of £5 imposed on him and have the record of same erased. When I returned to the front of the barracks, I found the sergeant urinating from the front door onto the street, and he started to argue with me on the footpath with his person exposed. On leaving the station, I was approached by a local trader who demanded that I make the station party pay some of their mess debts for the preceding 12 months, now amounting to some £70. The whole situation at Corofin, County Galway was disgraceful. I returned to Tuam and had all the station party suspended immediately. I hope that the divisional officer will ensure that these men discharge their local debts before they themselves are discharged from the force. Now, I came across that 30 or 40 years ago first. And actually it was a hoax. It never happened.